On the day 16th will begin the Red Week. It is an initiative of the Catholic Association Aid to the Church in Need to draw the world's attention to persecuted Christians. Of course, not only to draw people's attention, but above all, to pray for these persecuted Christians. And it is an initiative that deserves all support, because the truth is that if they do something to a journalist or a politician, especially if they are on the left, it is of course regrettable, and I do not justify it, but it is news in all the world's media. But if a group of Catholics in a corner of Africa, for example, are massacred, have their lands and their houses burnt, their crops burnt, nobody tells anyone about it, or at least nobody ever tells anyone about it in the mainstream media. And people never find out about it, not even Catholics themselves. That is why the Aid to the Church in Need had this brilliant initiative of the lighting red, hence the name Red Week. Some monuments started in 2015. The members of this association illuminating the great sculpture of the great statue of Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro, an impressive image. Then the following year, Italian members of the Aid to the Church in Need lit up the Trevi Fountain in red. In this way, people began to ask what is going on, and so the media, if only for the sake of taking eye-catching pictures, began to talk about this reality that almost everyone ignores. Billions of Christians who are persecuted in the world. This year, 14 countries have joined the initiative. Countries on all continents were to be illuminated, and churches, cathedrals, even monuments were to be illuminated. I repeat, the most important thing is to pray. And that is precisely why there will also be prayer evenings throughout the week, and of course conferences. The situation is serious, perhaps because we think it is happening to others. If we know about it, but the situation is serious, we do not give it any importance, but it is serious. A few days ago, a Nigerian priest who had already been kidnapped was kidnapped again for the second time. And also in Nigeria, 71 Catholic farmers were killed, plus those who were injured and badly wounded by a group of Muslims. Yes, okay, they are radical Muslims. Fine. But by a group of Muslims. At the moment, there is no country in that border area between the Muslim world and the Christian world. Or at least there is hardly any country where there is no activity of these terrorist groups, massacring, persecuting Christians, Catholics or Protestants. And this, I insist, is not talked about. And it is not just a question of bloody persecution in Africa or in Muslim countries. There is another type of repression. The impossibility, for example, of converting to Christianity without suffering this persecution. A few days ago, the Holy Father was in Bahrain. Again, the speeches he made, he said some words that I personally liked very much, which he considered courageous and necessary. He said that it is not enough to allow freedom of worship in Bahrain. There is a Catholic church, and in fact, he went to the inauguration of that church. It is not enough to allow freedom of worship. That is to say, it is not enough for them to say, you can go to Mass and we will not persecute you. That is why he said, religious freedom is necessary, which is a much broader concept than freedom of worship, although he did not specify it. Religious freedom means that you can change your religion without being persecuted for it. And in this Islam, In many places, it is light years away from achieving this, and that was said that it is precisely the respect for that religious freedom, not just freedom of worship, which in many Muslim countries is not even allowed. But it is the respect for religious freedom that gives a true sense of how peace-loving that particular religion is. It is not just Muslim countries. In China, Cardinal Zen, an elderly, venerable cardinal, a former bishop of Hong Kong, is on trial. He is on trial for an administrative offense. He is on trial and he is a threat to the party that is already very elderly. There are agreements between the Vatican and the Chinese Communist government, the contents of which is not known. It is known that these agreements have been signed, but it is not what the agreements say. Well, that is fine. But the reality is that repression against the church continues in China. People in prison, temples destroyed. They even force Catholics to pray as if they were a god, or to praise as if he were a god, the leader of the Communist Party. That is persecution. Africa, China especially, but if we look at America, we see at least 3 communist dictatorships where persecution is real. What is happening, for example, in Nicaragua, what is happening there? Beautiful country of Rubén Darío, with several priests in jail, others forced into exile, with a bishop in house arrest, thanks to intervention, if not in prison. He would be with the priests who were in prison with him. Cuba, Venezuela, and other countries that do not go to such extremes. He says there is also persecution there, even in Mexico, an extraordinary country full of wonderful people. But even in Mexico, the government is proposing a law that for the time being prohibits the display of nativity scenes in public places now for Christmas. But what we are hearing is that the law is going to prohibit even public manifestations of the faith. For example, processions. Although I honestly do not believe that there is any rule in Mexico who thinks he is enough power, not even with the use of tanks, to prevent people from going in procession to the village of Guadalupe to venerate the Virgin of the day. The most impressive manifestation of faith in the world. But not only in Latin America. Canada, for example, Canada's Pacific country, is seeing attacks on the church multiplying. Temples that were historical monuments have been burned down, even deliberately. The United States, a country that is generally very respectful of religion, is also witnessing acts of vandalism against the church, although to a lesser extent than in other countries. Europe is not far behind, although unfortunately it is France that has the primacy of these attacks, which are in one form or another all over the continent. There are many persecuted Christians and people do not know it. We have to make it known and we have to pray for them. And we must not forget those other persecuted Catholics within the church itself, although not at the same levels. Of course, I am talking about what is happening in Africa or what is happening in other places. But if these harassments that some priests or some lay people are suffering simply for defending what the church has always taught, and now it is not politically correct to say why it is not that, they say what the world wants to hear. Yet that is exactly what the world needs to hear, because that is what Christ said and wants us to say, precisely for the salvation of the world. Let us pray for persecuted Christians. Maybe today they are far from your home. It is possible, but it is also possible that tomorrow If you are faithful to Christ, it will be your turn. See you next week, God willing.